Hey world, what up? The Brooklyn Nets, the big three, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden. Now, Kevin Durant has not played in the last 3 to 4 games due to COVID protocols, so that's something we have to put on the side as of right now. The Brooklyn Nets are at a 15-12 record, third in the Eastern Conference. And in the Eastern Conference, man, you can have a losing record like the Toronto Raptors, and they're a fifth seed as of right now. The top four teams in the Eastern Conference are the tier ones of the East, such as the Milwaukee Bucks, the Philadelphia 76ers, the Boston Celtics, and the Brooklyn Nets. Now, tier twos you're going to have is like the Indiana Pacers of the world, and so on and so forth. Pretty much everything else is irrelevant. The Brooklyn Nets, as of right now, since Kevin Durant has been out for a few couple games, at the very beginning, we already saw Kyrie and James Harden really couldn't coexist as it is. There was trade rumors of pretty much fans of wanting Kyrie Irving to be traded away to just build with James Harden and Kevin Durant, but management, the team, and they're all stuck together. So you're gonna have James Harden, Kyrie, and um, Kevin Durant. Those three are gonna stick together for their tenure within the Brooklyn Nets. I've always stated the Nets will not win the championship within this season, not only due to eternal roster moves and all that, also in the background, but I'll stick it here on a more two-dimensional basis. So based on the roster, they don't have the depth that they need. There's three things that they're lacking. An interior big. DeAndre Jordan has not played up to par. He's been very average for their team, and a lot of fans are pretty much proclaiming he needs to come off the bench. They traded away Jarrett Allen. He's out of there. They don't have an interior big. They need to go for JaVale McGee within their team. The Cleveland Cavaliers have five centers, abundance amount of bigs. You got Andre Drummond, used to have Kevin Love out there, but he's been hurt. You have Thon Maker. You got Jarrett Allen. You got JaVale McGee. And I believe there's one other center I'm forgetting about. But the Nets could really use JaVale McGee the most as their starting five. JaVale McGee was one of the best and underrated defenders and interior big defensive anchors with the LA Lakers back of last season. And that was one of the key reasons why the Lakers were one of the best, if not the best team of basketball. And both on the defensive end as well. The Nets could really use him. They did bring in Noah Vonleh, which, I mean, he's 25 years of age. I mean, he's nice, but I mean, I'm not crazy about that move whatsoever. There's not a lot of free agents out there you can go for. I mean, like in a Tyson Chandler, Zach Randolph, pull him out of retirement or something along those lines. Nothing too crazy. Ante Zivich or whatever's that cat's name from the Cavaliers. So you really got to look to find a trade. You can potentially get a trade partner with the Knicks for Taj Gibson, especially you want to go for JaVale McGee, but those are the main things you need right there. Second of all, their bench. They don't have the depth as they need. If anything, you may want to put Joe Harris coming off the bench as a six-man type role. There's not a lot of players that coming off the bench you can really rely on. I mean, I don't trust Landry Shamet coming off one of the main guys from your bench. Iman Shumpert, I love the move. I've always stated they needed to bring in Iman Shumpert. He fits perfectly within their roster. Coming off the bench, a rotation player, a wing defender, 3-and-D, and that chemistry type basis. But everything else is kind of claxy up in the air. They need to make some more roster moves. They need to bring in more 3-and-D type defenders and another true veteran point guard. He doesn't have to get a lot of minutes, but he can be ready, such as like a George Hill. Fully expect the OKC Thunder, if they don't trade away George Hill, to where they would be able to buy him out before the trade down line or somewhere in that mix. So if you're the Nets, you really want to go for George Hill. You really want to go for JaVale McGee. And then bring in another 2 or 3 type on your team. For example, you can bring in an Allen Craft from free agency. Maybe J.R. Smith, if anything. Something along those range. But I've been talking too much. Let's jump into here and we'll cover a little more reasons why.
All right, airing out that dirty laundry, we now welcome in Big Perk. Max, what do you think the Nets' biggest flaw is right now?
Like I said before, they need an interior big. They need more of a bench 3-and-D type players coming off within them. And then again, you need to work out a rotation to where James Harden and Kyrie Irving are playing the least amount of time together.
Well, I've said in the past, and I've said until now, it's defense, but I want to take it a level deeper. The real issue with the Nets, and this has to do with the defense and the results and everything, is they have a thin roster. I mean, when you really look at what
Bingo.
just happened, they came into the year, I didn't even think they needed James Harden to get out of the East. Then Dinwiddie got hurt.
Bingo part two.
And what that meant was the way they addressed the fact that now they were short one of their playmakers was to trade two more of their best pieces, other than obviously KD and Kyrie, in order to get even more top heavy, because James Harden will offset that. So they bring in James Harden. Now, they're an extremely top heavy group. But if they're missing one of their pieces, which they were, KD, last night, they're really short-handed because of the lack of depth on the roster. And what that means, it has, like, defensively, obviously they have work to do. But what the top heaviness of the roster means is you're really relying on those guys to take you there. This is a COVID year. They're not practicing. It's a brand new group. They're relying on the talent of the big three to overcome that, to overcome a lack of depth. And by the way, even defense, that's not just effort, it's communication. Hard to get that together when you're bringing a whole bunch of guys together and you can't practice like a normal season. Things are just different. So really what you're relying on, especially early in the season, is, look, the three of you guys are so talented, you're going to overcome these shortcomings while we get the defense together, while we get used to each other, while maybe before the deadline we bring in a piece to play some defense, grab some defensive boards. Jeff Green is a useful player still, especially as a four.
And Jeff Green has been very ideal for their team, but they've elevated him so much to where he's an X factor for the Brooklyn Nets, which is a good and a bad thing because he's pretty much your sixth man coming off your bench, which that's never been his role, that never will be. But they don't have any true, how do I say this? The Nets roster coming off their bench, they don't have any true impact players besides from Jeff Green. I mean, Landry Shamit's all over the place. Timothy Cabarrot, I mean, he's 25, he's young. He's okay, but, I mean, you're not going to trust Tyler Johnson. You're not going to trust Noah Vonleh as well. I mean, Iman Shumpert has won a championship. He's doing his thing. He knows what to do. So you can trust Iman Shumpert, and you can also trust Jeff Green coming off the bench, but you need to have more of a you need to go around 8, 9, 10 deep in the playoffs. You can't just rely a 7, 8-man roster at most because that's what it's looking like for the Nets.
5 when you're playing small ball, you're not going to play any defense. You're not going to stop people. You're not going to get rebounds. So with that thin roster, when they're missing KD, it's too much. Perk, since the Harden trade, they are the worst defensive team of all time, but they're able to win a lot because they're one of the best offensive teams of all time. Now you take your best player out, the offense isn't good enough to make up for the defensive shortcomings. The number one flaw is they're top-heavy and thin.
And like I said before, the Nets are not winning the championship this season. They have a great chance of coming out of the East. As of right now, I've always stated the Boston Celtics I fully expect to come out of the Eastern Conference, but that was before the James Harden trade. Ever since the James Harden trade went down with, it's still for me, it's either the Nets or Celtics. Most likely going to be the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, with the big three of Kyrie, James Harden, KD, I just don't see how a team in the East could stop them in the playoffs. It's too much firepower. But they would have to run into the Lakers, and they're not going to beat the Lakers. I fully expect the Nets to win a championship with that core three, either next season or in 2023. One of those 2 seasons, they're going to get it done with. But they need a lot of other roster changes, other roster moves. Contending teams like this really benefit within the trading deadline period, let alone when teams are buying out these players with expiring contracts. So, for example, like George Hill is pretty much going to get bought out. JaVale McGee, for example. So if these players aren't getting traded, they'll be bought out. Who are they going to go to? The contending teams like the Lakers, the Clippers, the Nets, the 76ers. I pretty much think those are the top 4 teams for any players right now. The Nets are an attractive destination for a big, and the most likely is going to be JaVale McGee if he's not traded. And with the point guard slot, George Hill would pretty much fit most likely with the Clippers, but heck, who knows? The Nets could really use him. He doesn't have to play a lot, but pretty much they can use him from time to time. Another veteran on this team. The Nets, and I've stated this, they need more veteran players on their roster coming off the bench. Landry Shamet, Reggie Perry, who else? Noah Vonleh, Tyler Johnson, and Timothy Cabarrot. They're young pieces. I really don't expect too much for them to play as much. The only two guys are Timothy and Landry. Besides from that, you need some more vets on your team. Allen Crabbe will be a nice addition for them. George Hill, JaVale McGee. Players like that you can somewhat trust, if anything, into the playoffs. And they need more vets coming down when it comes to their bench. Another piece, they could bring in Tyson Chandler as a third center. He doesn't have to play, but a locker room presence. They need more of that Nets roster coming in. I fully expect next season in 2022, whenever they're in the offseason stage to where they'll make trades and free agency signings, but because they just brought in James Harden. But as for right now, the Nets roster is pretty much going to look the same. Expect one or two nice pieces to join in, but that won't get it done to win a championship.
Well, Max, look, I don't disagree with nothing you just said, but I'm gonna take it a step further. And right, they can't stop a nosebleed. Their defense is horrible, but you could put in all the schemes, you could watch all the film. It has to come within. Now, if we were talking about a group of young guys, then it would be a difference. Guys that have won level, guys that have won championships, guys that have won finals MVPs, guys like James Harden, a guy like James Harden who hasn't won a championship, but he's battle tested. He knows how to get to the finals. He knows what it takes to advance in the postseason. So when I look at it, I'm looking at the lack of accountability and watching the Nets, watching them blow coverage after coverage after coverage, time and time again, shows me that it's a lack of accountability in their locker room. And people are not holding each other accountable. When I was on the Celtics, the first thing that happened is guys bought in defensively. Yeah, you had Ray Allen, Paul Pierce, and Kevin Garnett. You knew you were going to get buckets. But they bought in on the defensive side, and they also allowed Doc Rivers to hold them accountable. You could tell the teams that are well coached and get held accountable.
And like I stated before, they need some veteran locker room presence. Even if these cats aren't playing, Steve Nash is a rookie head coach. The players are not going to respect him due to that level. And if you're looking at your three best players, Kyrie Irving, KD, and James Harden, most of those guys are either betas or they don't know how to lead in a correct manner, in a masculine, dominant manner. They don't know how to do so. James Harden likes to do his own thing. As right now joining the Nets, he's pretty much being a follower because he has to defer to Kevin Durant and Kyrie's team. Kyrie Irving has somewhat of an alpha personality, but it's been too toxic playing with LeBron James to where he's learned these bad traits and it's rubbed off on his teammates. Kevin Durant, he is a beta and he does not want to lead. He likes to pretty much defer down to an alpha or masculine personality. So it's very chaotic. It's not an ideal mix of personalities, roles, and leadership when it comes to the Nets 3. Now, if you're looking off their bench, they have a bunch of young cats out there. They don't have any true vets who have gone deep in the playoffs or have a resume with their legacy in the league. So right now, it's up in the air. No one knows who to truly rely on. They're just playing kind of street basketball. They don't have a true leader. So bringing in, for example, Zach Randolph for retirement, Tyson Chandler. Iman Shumpert was somewhat of a nice piece as well. I'm trying to think of another name or two. Taj Gibson, George Hill. Those would be, and JaVale McGee. Any three of those five, two of those five, those are ideal locker room fits, let alone some players that would be ideal as vets coming off the bench. That's what the Nets roster needs to look to. If you're a contending team in the NBA, the Lakers, I believe, were the oldest team in the NBA last season. Correct me if I'm wrong, or top 5. They won the championship. It's about chemistry. It's about veteran leadership. That's what happens when you go deeper in the playoffs. James Harden is searching for a championship. Kevin Durant is searching to be a true number one guy leading a team to a championship. And Kyrie Irving is trying to stay, quote-unquote, relevant in the league again by being a number 2 guy of winning a championship. So Kyrie Irving, he's probably not going to be number 2, number 3. It's up in the air. With all these guys, everything's in order to where they need to make internal changes.
The Utah Jazz, the way that they're flying around, the way that
So are you saying Steve Nash is the issue?
Listen, Steve Nash is not the issue. They have enough talent to win a championship. They have enough talent this season not to win the champ. I mean, they could win a championship, but they're not against the Lakers. Um, if they go against the Clippers, who knows about that? That'll be up in the air. That's 50-50. But if they go against the Lakers, they're not winning a championship. Now, they'll have a competitive series, and they have a chance to, but I don't see that happening. Steve Nash is not going to be the issue. They brought him in for a reason. You have Mike D'Antoni as your assistant. You have a couple others as well. You need to work on your roster. Bring in some vets. That's it.
I'm saying it's a lack of accountability, however you want to paint it. I'm not ducking or hiding. I'm telling you what's going on. When you look at a championship team and you look at these guys blowing defensive coverages and not giving the right effort, that goes to show me that somebody is not holding these guys accountable.
With these three ISO scores, the superstars and some stars, with Katie, James Harden, Kyrie, those are the three main ISO scorers out there. You need to bring in 3-and-D type players. The rest of your players pretty much need to be sharpshooters, let alone defensive dogs out there. That's what the rest of the roster needs to be. And that's the most ideal fit, playing the ISO basketball way with KD, Kyrie, and James Harden. If you get 3-point shooters, snipers out there, like you have, for example, like with Joe Harris, Landry Shamet, who could be. But then you need to get some more defensive dogs. That's why I loved how they brought in Iman Shumpert on their team. Jeff Green somewhat fills that role. DeAndre Jordan needs to pick it up. But you need to bring some more out there, more defensive dogs. They need a culture. They need an identity.
Whether it's Steve Nash, whether it's Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden not holding each other accountable, doing film session or doing walkthrough, something is not right. And that's what I'm telling you, Max. We could talk about their defense, and I get it. That defense is horrible. But when you're vets, DeAndre Jordan, Jeff Green, all these veteran guys, it's not rocket science. Like, you could look, you could see what's going on once you see them blowing coverages.
One thing I'll say is Steve Nash is a rookie head coach who was not known for his defense, nor did he play on a team that was known for their defense, needless to say. And Mike D'Antoni, who's there as, some experience on the bench, also obviously was not known for his defense. Way before I ever heard Stephen A. say that Jamie Foxx called him Antony, no D, I was making that same joke, Perk, on LA radio when D'Antoni was it. That's Mike Antony, no
Perk.
D. I mean, so that, yes, like that's part of it. But let me say something. Those Phoenix Suns teams without great defense made playoff runs every year. They got deep. And even right now, if you look at, like, I talk about their offensive efficiency versus their defensive efficiency. Worst ever versus almost.
All right, I'm in and off here. Listen, the question is, what's the biggest flaw with the Nets overall? They need more. They need more veterans on their team. They need 3-and-D type players, some dogs out there defensively to create a culture. You do need an interior big, a defensive anchor alongside with DeAndre Jordan. So basically, long story short, some players to kind of throw around. JaVale McGee would be most ideal. George Hill will be ideal as well. Good thing bringing in Iman Shumpert. Bring another big like Tyson Chandler, Zach Randolph as your third center. They don't have to play, but they pretty much have to be prepared and have that locker room presence. And some other, you need some other pretty much vets coming out. Either J.R. Smith, which his personality's up in the air. He still would fit with this team. Alan Crabb, for example. And somewhere along those lines. And another one I forgot to include, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson. I don't know how he's still a free agent as of right now. He would be a nice fit with the Nets. He can kind of play the Jeff Green type role. Basically, from that, unfortunate Spencer Dinwiddie got hurt this season. He would have fit very well with the roster, being a bench piece. But besides from that, the Nets, they need to make a couple of those moves. They need to get some of the young cats out of there. They need to go veteran type basis to hold some accountability and work on their defensive side. JaVale McGee would be huge as a center for them. If not him, then Taj Gibson. Besides from that, defense, big men, I'm out.